Hi guys, it's me, Sapphire Opal 5 again. Thank you for coming by to watch this video. Today I want to talk about how incarnations work and touch briefly first on how incarnations don't work. In this video I'm also going to talk about different types of incarnations and how you may figure out which type you are or not. So, on to how incarnations don't work first. Now, on to how incarnations don't work. It seems to me, based on diagrams of how astral projection supposedly works, such as people drawing diagrams of a silver rope being attached to the soul or astral body, and the astral body is essentially attached to this rope during astral projection, which happens when we're asleep. This implies that people believe that the astral body or the soul resides within the physical body and it only does activities when we're essentially asleep, attached to the silver rope, or however you want to think of it. This is actually not how incarnations work. And the astral body does not sit inside of the body. By the way, astral bodies and higher selves are two different things, which is I will explain in this video. Astral bodies actually exist independently inside of the astral planes, and a lot of times they may be side by side their physical incarnation. If you've ever seen the movie The Golden Compass, in this particular universe, demons, which are akin to astral bodies but they're in animal form instead, are really, this is really a lot closer to how incarnations work, but not quite. So I wanted to get this tidbit of information out of the way because it seems like this is how people interpret incarnations and how the soul works and this and that, and it really is not. So this is where I'm going to start talking about how incarnations really do work. Okay, so now on to how incarnations do work. Now, mind you, as I'm making these types of videos, I get my information from divination, using a pendulum and a printable ABC chart, and this totally does work. They totally do move on their own, and also based on like my own personal experiences and things like that. So yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way. So the way incarnations actually work, and it was the Nordic god of mischief, Loki, who actually, by the way, is a phenomenal guide when he's not, well, being a god of mischief. When I asked him, how do incarnations work? He said it is taking a copy of the higher self's conscience and putting it in the brain. Now, this works in both the physical incarnations and in the creation of astral bodies. Now, with astral bodies versus higher selves, I will explain this. I'll touch more onto this later, but not everybody has a higher self. So I don't know if you've watched the second Thor movie, The Dark World, where they're talking about the Aether and how it's red and how it's kind of like its own force. It makes it so that Natalie Portman's character stays alive, but it's really only protecting itself kind of deal. So that is really demonic essence, is what Aether actually is. And this is a substance that is also used to create astral bodies and so-called incarnate souls. I call Aether filler substance. And then higher self essence is really more of a soul essence, in my opinion, and really just what people think of souls are, they call souls higher selves is what people call them. But like I said, not everybody has a higher self, but everybody does have an astral body. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Now I'm going to talk about incarnation types, and that's where I will touch more onto the differences of having a higher self in your essence versus having no higher self in your essence. Okay, so I do believe that as I'm making this video, that the explanation of what a soul original versus soul copy versus having a so-called lower self or no higher self, you just exist, no real soul, you're just existing type of deal. So I'm going to start with a soul original, which is the mix, which is essentially where your soul consists of only the essences of one or two, or your higher self, your soul is the mix of one or two essences of astral beings, higher selves. So a soul original, as I think the higher institution, I can't really think of the name of them right now, as put it, there are some people that are white blood cells, and white blood cells, interestingly enough, compared to red blood cells, have a nucleus, which is kind of like almost like where the DNA is held and stuff like that in cells. It almost makes me think of like the brain of a cell, like they kind of instruct. They contain the instructions for what a cell is supposed to do, and contains a lot of information about a whole lot of different stuff. So a soul original, I want to compare it to a white blood cell. And it said that the white blood cells of society, they don't really try to fit in as much. They have more of a specific job to do. They have more of a purpose, a specific purpose in life. Their purpose isn't just to be part of the flow, so to speak, like maybe like red blood cells are. And like soul originals may not always necessarily be your go-to, like like to fit in or whatever, or how to make someone like you more or something like that. Or you may seek them for advice for like conflicts, or you have a problem or you're trying to figure out or something. And with soul originals, it's kind of more like they may be more spiritual, they may be more in tune with themselves, and I don't know if you notice this or not, but some people, they just have more of a personality, more of a mind of their own, form their own opinions, they have their own point of views, and they have their own unique reasoning, and you can definitely tell that they are who they are, right? Like they can stand out from a crowd a little bit easier, I feel like. And that's because they are a soul original. Like they are all higher self. They have no filler substance. Like they just have a more full personality, full mindset, fullness to them, if that makes sense. So basically with the soul originals, it's kind of more like they're just more who they are, and they are more, even though we are all 100% who we are, it's just like with the soul originals, they're kind of like more like, they're just more in tune with themselves a lot of times, if that makes sense. Or they're more in tune with what they're not aware of, if that makes sense. Like more self-awareness in that sense of their limitations, what they can and can't do, and what their skills are, and things like that. Not necessarily, having 100% direction in life, but they kind of know more about themselves, higher introspection, if that makes sense. Now, next up, I want to talk about soul copies. Okay, now on to the soul copies. So basically, a soul copy is like a mix of ether, the so-called filler substance, and a little bit of an essence of an astral being, or higher self, soul, whatever you want to call it, making your soul. So soul originals are kind of like white blood cells. They do contain a nuclei. They have a specific job to do, and they're kind of more like your go-to when there's a problem, like like when an invading bacteria or virus or whatever enters the body, and out comes the white blood cells. But they might not necessarily be your go-to for just go making things happen. They're probably your more go-to when a change is necessary in civilization. But that's typically what a soul original is. Now with a soul copies, they have their place too. It's not a bad thing, but it's just like I said, everyone's got their own purpose. And with the soul copies, sometimes if you're like a close copy where you only have just a small bit of ether or whatever, you can be very much more like a soul original. How to tell the difference? You probably will feel like, okay, I'm not quite this, but I'm pretty close. Maybe I have a little bit of a so-called inner demon here and there, but not a whole lot, and I usually fight against it. Now, when it comes to the soul copies, they're kind of more like the red blood cells. They don't contain nuclei because that's how they get more of a flatter surface, so that the red blood cells can flow through the veins easier and arteries and things like that, and easier to carry oxygen this way. So with the soul copies, it's kind of more like, they go with the flow, like red blood cells do in the body. And their job is more so to make it so that everyday society is going on. Like, like a lot of these people, they may think, a job is a job, and, they're just kind of like, going through the motions, maybe not putting a whole lot of thought into everyday living. Like, don't take this too seriously, it's just, we live this life once, let's try to enjoy it, maybe not putting too much thought into anything, and just, again, going with the flow. Now, the bad part about being a soul copy, especially if you have more ether than higher self essence, is that a lot of these people can also be very selfish. Like, they're not necessarily thinking about how what they're doing is impacting others. Like, they may be more prone to firing people. It's like, oh, I'm just doing my job. But then it's like, try to come up with, like, a soul original may be more prone to saying, all right, well, I'm firing this person, but maybe I can give them, like, a couple weeks of pay so that they have something to go off of and offer, like, I could be a reference, things like that, if they actually mean it and like the person, kind of deal. With soul copies, they can kind of be a little bit more selfish at times, quite frankly, and it doesn't really matter, and it's not as discriminating as to who, as far as this type of thing goes, where it's kind of like, don't take it personal, blah, 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 or don't, it's not like, it's just business, or it's just like, they don't put too much thought into much of anything, just because they just can't, or they just won't, for whatever reason. And then, it tends to be a little bit more like, like self-preservation is stronger in soul copies, and, and people that don't even have a higher self-essence, and things like that. So next, I do want to talk about the incarnation type where it's just ether or just filler substance. So yeah, that up next, ether incarnations. Okay, now, last but not least, for the incarnation types, ether or filler substance, or so-called lower self incarnations. Now, these are the so-called dark workers, as people like to call it, okay? Our dark side, our inner demons, so to speak, is how is what people are going to reference the ether or the filler substance, the lower selves. Okay? So you could basically call these like the invaders in a way. Like, these are the type of people, like, you want to think of a lot of people will think of like psychopaths when it comes to ether incarnations, okay? Like, they'll think of like, the horrible people that rob banks and all this and that. That's not necessarily true. Some people, they do what they do for a certain reason, and it's not always a good one, but I don't condone any of those things, by the way, just before someone comes up with this moronic assumption based on what I just said. But when it comes to ether incarnations or straight up lower self incarnations, just filler substance, like the absolute type that never puts any thought into stuff, doesn't really have a care in the world, and are pretty much just downright very selfish people. So strong self-preservation, very primitive almost, like in how they approach the world, like very primitive, like almost animalistic in a way, like with how they approach sex, with how they approach relationships. It's about procreation. It's about self-preservation of the DNA, preserving the family name, and that's all they really care about. Self-preservation and staying alive as long as possible kind of deal. So a lot of it, like, and what you really think of when it comes to like the stereotypical really greedy people, like the type that will really screw you over, and they don't care as long as it means preserving themselves, and that's all that matters. And that's really the best way I can explain lower selves very briefly. And but as one of my good old friends said, you don't have to be a rapist or a murderer or even a thief to be a piece of shit. Like, you could be like it's part of my French, but you could be a bad person not doing any of those things. Like I said before, you could be the type of person that, they just do their thing, like I mentioned earlier. Like Sue Coffees, they do, have a little bit more of a thought process about things, and they do have more of a conscience, so to speak. But people that are just ether incarnations are very selfish beings. They're very, it's almost like they see others as a means to an end, like using people and loving things in a way, is how I want to put it. Very mindless, like very easy to brainwash, because I will talk about this is a whole different subject, but talking about demons and technology, and how demons are cyborgs, and it all ties into this ether filler stuff, because that's what they are. They're incarnated demons, quite frankly. It's not necessarily a horrible thing, because what's funny, just not really funny, but what's interesting is that demons themselves are a lot more spiritual than these ether incarnations are. Even though that's what these incarnations are, they're essentially demons incarnated on Earth, but demons themselves are a lot more spiritual than these ether incarnations. And they know that these people are pieces of crap, and these people are just not good souls. They're so-called, they're bad souls, and they know it. And then, humans they're just programmed to be a certain way, just like their incarnations are programmed to just go with the flow, just to, do their own thing, do whatever it takes to survive. Self-preservation. The whole 9 yards, and it doesn't matter what it takes, even if it means murder, if it means robbing, if it means this, doing that, and screwing this person over, screwing that person over. Doesn't really matter, as long as they preserve themselves and survive as long as possible, no matter how greedy they are. That's all that matters to them. It's survivalism. So that is the topic of types of soul incarnations. As I was making this video, again, I realized that the different types of incarnations all deserve an explanation before we go forward in this video. Okay, so I talked about in this video how incarnations do work and the types of incarnations. So this is the part where I tell you that deities and some other beings do have multiple incarnations. And the way that is possible is basically, making soul copies, and then there will be like a soul original. And by the way, a whole what's in mythology and stuff is BS. I mean, Poseidon is not really this super temperamental guy. I mean, he can be, but, a lot of the times they can actually be pretty chill, cool people. And Poseidon himself is pretty chill. So, anywho, on with that. So, what I've learned about Poseidon incarnations is a lot of them have been involved in at least one really bad car wreck, if not more. They're very spiritual people and also very intuitive. They are often involved with the bartending side of the hospitality industry one way or another, whether they're a owner of a bar or they like to be a patron or they work in that industry somehow. They love the ocean, love the beach, stuff like that. And so those are just some of the traits of Poseidon incarnations. Now, this is why I'm bringing this up. So I talked about like how there's weird timing and weird coincidences and that are just a little bit too much to not take note of. So the soul original on Earth of Poseidon is the actor Jared Padalecki. He plays Sam Winchester on Supernatural, and he also is the director of the show Walker. He was in the movie Friday the 13th, House of Wax, and got into a really bad car wreck in 2004, 2003, filming the movie Flight of the Phoenix. Back in 2003 or 2004. I don't know when that movie was being filmed or when that particular car accident happened. And then he also got into one last April. And then I know a few other ones, but two of them I want to mention indirectly are my son's dad. So he also is a Poseidon copy. He got into a really bad car wreck when he was 19 years old back in or was going to be 19 back in 2005, I want to say is when it was it was in the summer, and he got into a really bad car wreck, and from that one he had to wear a hip plate in his hip and rods in his leg and all this other stuff, and still has a lot of scars in his arm and stuff to this day and on his head from all the glass and stuff. And then another guy I briefly dated was also a Poseidon copy. He got involved in a hit and run where he was walking and someone hit him and they left him for dead in this parking building. And he has a plate in his spine to this day because of it. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because with my son's dad, he got into that bad car wreck back in 2005, and then Jared got involved in that sometime in 2003 or 2004, whenever filming of that movie was taking place, Flight of the Phoenix, which is a little ironic because, phoenixes are about coming back from the dead and, rising and all the other stuff. And then last year, my son's dad got involved was in the car wreck, hit a tree at 2, 3 in the morning on his way to work at a factory, and he was wrapped around a tree, basically was knocked unconscious, and had to be basically cut out of the car with a chainsaw by the fire department. And then a month and a half later, month and 3 weeks later, something like that, Jared Padalecki gets into a car wreck. And I just thought that the timing of that was very eerie and very much too much of a coincidence. And I was like, all right, what's going on here? And so I picked up my pendulum and ABC chart, and it's it's proof that they both are Poseidon incarnations, and it just blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's crazy. You know, like similar timelines, similar life events. And I know that Jared at least at one point owned a bar, multiple bars, and then my son's dad was a bartender and at one point wanted to own a bartending company. So I just thought that was very interesting to mention that this is how deities have multiple incarnations, and also this is an example of how similar incarnations can be, and they might not even know it, or they do meet and they become really best friends and they really just notice a lot of weird similarities between themselves. And that is how come some people have very weird similar life mark events and their timelines and their divine blueprints and such. So I wanted to mention this tidbit before I wrap up this video here. I do appreciate and thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it insightful one way or another and learned how incarnations do and don't work. And I hope it starts to make things click in your head and make it so that things kind of start making a little bit more sense in how things work spiritually and such. Thank you again for watching this video. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.